Hi, this is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. A while back, I did a couple of videos on a topic: how to release an album, how not to, why maybe you shouldn't release an album. And these are still some of the most popular videos on this channel to this day. They still get tons of views day in, day out, tons of comments. And I haven't revisited this idea in a while. And every once in a while, I think we got to, because it's so important. And there's always new viewers to the channel. And even if you're not a new viewer, I think you need this hammered back into your head, because we're not in the 1970s anymore. We don't live in a world where it necessarily makes sense, where if you have no audience, to go out there and just release a full-length album and hope for the best. There's better strategies in a digital streaming age of actually building an audience and then eventually releasing a full-length album that you have an audience that's hungry to hear, that they're actually clamoring for this thing and want it. So if you're Beyonce, like, go ahead, release a full-length album. You know, you have an audience, do it. Even if you're not Beyonce, if you have some type of audience, they're waiting for the next thing from you, go for it. You know, drop your magnum opus on them, do the full-length album route. But even if you record a full-length album, you feel like that's the way you have to do it because you grew up listening to albums and you love collections of 10 to 12 songs that were written around the same time. I get it. Awesome. You can even record it that way. Recording it that way might not make the most sense in this digital day and age, but if you were gonna record it that way, that's fine. But I'm going to argue that maybe you shouldn't release it that way, because today I want to talk about the kiss of death for releasing your album. And that is a particular album release strategy that most new bands or new artists go through. And it looks a little something like this. They spend months writing songs. They spend months potentially recording them. Then they spend potentially months in post-production, overdubs, mixing, mastering. And then when it's all done, they say, finally it's done. We spent 1.5 years on this thing. And then they release it. And they say, here's our album. And nobody cares. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Because you don't have an audience yet. You created this thing and there's no audience for it. And now you're just another bit in the noise, the constant noise of constant new media being created that's out there. You ever looked at television back in the days when people had televisions, where it'd be like static, you know, when the television channel wasn't coming in or you're between channels? Even if you didn't grow up in the age of analog television, you've probably seen this kind of image. Imagine being one of those little flecks of black or white in that image. That's what you seem like when you release an album to nobody, to an audience for your stuff that doesn't exist yet. The big thing now is not creating the media. It's creating the audience. It's connecting with people who want to hear more from you. And when you release an album all at once, you only have one shot to make those connections. So the big problem that so many people run into is they put all this time, all this thought, all this energy, all this mental bandwidth into writing the songs, arranging them, recording them, mixing them, thinking about the song order, thinking about how the kick and the bass should sit together, all this stuff. But they don't think ahead in the same way about a release strategy. So they just put the thing out and then they say, now what? Now we've got to go find some listeners for it. And this is exactly backwards. You should be finding the listeners before you drop the thing. And if instead of releasing 12 songs at once, imagine what would happen if you had no audience, but you released one song a month for 12 months. Could you build an audience over that time with the ability to touch them 1 month? And maybe that first song that you put out, it only ever gets heard 50 times. That's okay, because next month you're putting out another one. Maybe it gets heard 500 times. That doesn't feel that great. It's not that many listens. Maybe it does feel great if you never even expected 500 people to hear your stuff, but you look at the numbers of some of your favorite artists or even bands who are bigger than you who you think are lame, and 500 doesn't seem like a lot. But maybe on the next one you figure out how to make it 1,500. Maybe on the next one you figure out how to make it 5,000. Because this becomes part of the game. The strategy of releasing this stuff and finding out how to get it in front of people. Because you're going to find out fairly quickly that just putting it up on your YouTube channel maybe isn't enough. That maybe there's other things you have to do. Maybe you want to connect with some music journalists or playlist makers to get your stuff promoted on their outlets. Maybe you can offer some type of music journalist, music blog, a premiere of your track where the first day or week that it's out, the only place that it can be seen or heard is on their website. And then they have an incentive to promote it. Now, you can't do that after the fact, having already released your 12-song album. You can't even do it by maybe writing them the day before your album drops and saying, hey, do you want to premiere this? No, you might have to plant those seeds long in advance. This might be something that you have to start strategizing on. So you might be getting in touch with that journalist or that blog a month in advance of your release going out to offer them the premiere on the day that your release does come out. I talk about even more strategies about what types of people to connect with and getting your music heard by people. There's a video I have called How to Get Your Music Heard by Actual People. It goes a little bit more into this idea of connecting with others who can help you promote your music. But without going too deep into the rabbit hole there, I just want to really hammer home this idea of having multiple opportunities to touch your audience. Of not just having the one magnum opus album. You release it and you say, what now? No, you give yourself a runway and you give yourself the ability to learn how to release stuff, learn how to connect with an audience, just like you learned your instrument, just like you learned how to play better in front of audiences by doing it again and again, just like you learned to sing or write songs better by doing it again and again. I'm sure if you're a songwriter, the songs you're writing today are probably way better than the songs you were writing 10 years ago or 5 years ago, or even maybe 2 years ago in a lot of ways. Maybe the songs you're writing now are better than the ones you wrote 6 months ago. Imagine if you took that same concerted effort of doing it and seeing what the results are again and again and again with releasing your music and connecting with an audience. Don't make it so that you've only got one shot. Make it so that it's okay to fail, because each of these little failures, sure, you wanted, 15,000 listens on your first release and you only got 1,500 or 150. But that doesn't have to be an ultimate failure. That little failure of not reaching the expectations is a learning opportunity for you to set different expectations or figure out what's the path from 1,500 to 15,000? And what's the path from 15,000 to 1.5 million? Because these things are achievable, but they don't happen just by plopping it up there. So I want you to think about that. I want you to think about that idea of how can we build in multiple touches? You could go so much deeper on this. Maybe it's not releasing one song a month for a year. Maybe it's releasing one song a month for a year, but in addition to that, you have a video version of that song that comes out sometime later in the month, so you can touch people again with it. Maybe you have another channel or artist that you collaborate with, and you do a cover of their song and they do a cover of your song, and that's another piece of content on each of your channels, cross-pollinating, cross-promoting the other person's channel. Maybe you do an off-the-cuff kind of live-streamed acoustic version of it on your YouTube channel or your Instagram. Just another way to touch people and attract them back to the main dish. Maybe you intersperse this with, off-the-cuff, easy-to-do live stream recordings of some of your older stuff. So that, again, there's ways to touch people. I could go into so much more detail on this. I'd love to one day do a whole bunch of case studies and walk you through some examples of, I think, some of the best people out there doing that, who I've worked with and who I've seen and who I've studied, because there's some super creative strategies to do this. But I just want to get your gears turning on that idea. Give yourself multiple opportunities to touch audiences, to connect with people, to build audiences. And the more of an audience you have, the more you can accelerate this process. If you already have some type of significant audience, rather than giving yourself all of this runway of one song per month, maybe you do one song per week for 12 weeks, or maybe you do one song per day for 12 days. And if you're so huge that you have such a huge audience that growing the audience isn't the biggest thing, but keeping them satisfied and coming back and interacting with you more is the big thing, then yeah, sure, you're at a place where you can just out of the blue drop a whole record. But that's not most of us. That's probably not you. And even if you already have some audience, building in a little bit of a runway for a release can be a good thing. And I know that most people watching videos about how to do record making stuff, maybe a lot of them are releasing their first records. A lot of them had bad experience releasing their first one. Now they're trying their second one. You know, maybe you're on your third or your first one with this new project. And maybe you don't have a huge audience yet for it. And that's okay, because there's ways to build them over time with concerted effort. Just like you built your skill writing songs or playing music or singing or arranging or mixing or whatever it is that you do, you built that skill over time. And releasing and getting an audience is another skill to build over time. So give yourself the time to do it. Give yourself the runway to do it. And plan it in advance, just like you'd plan your recording and mixing in advance. Look out in front and have a release strategy that goes out at least over the course of a month, if not over the course of a season or a year before you release the thing. So that's something that I want you to think about. Sounds simple, sounds obvious once you've had it hammered into your head, and I hope it is hammered into your head now. But for so many people, it's not hammered in their head yet. They make the same mistake and they get the kiss of death. But I hope you guys get the kiss of life. We'll breathe some life into your next release by following this strategy. Let me know about your successes and failures making records down below and releasing them down below. What has worked for you? What hasn't worked for you? If you're on the YouTube version, put it right down there in the comment section. If you're on one of the audio-only versions, you can shoot me an email, podcast@SonicScoop.com. I'd love to hear your story as well as your questions. Thanks for tuning in. This has been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. See you next time. If you like this episode and you want to get into planning your next music release in advance, check out the free guide I've got for you. It's a PDF, the music pre-production checklist. Check it out, SonicScoop.com/checklist. That's SonicScoop.com/checklist, 100% free.